Hello and welcome back to Political Excess. Today we're going to take a look and see how well the redistricting maps correspond and reflect the popular vote in some of these states. Now, earlier in the year I did review every single redistricting map on this channel, so take a look at those videos if you'd like. And about 6 months ago, after redistricting was completed, I made a video on the top 10 worst maps for Republicans and the top 10 worst for the Democrats. I also did the top 10 fairest redistricting maps. So again, take a look at those videos if you are interested. But today, I'm going to take the top 5 worst maps for the Democrats and the top 5 worst for the Republicans from those top 10 videos, and we're going to go through each of those 5 and see what the results are to find out how bad these maps really were. Now, I understand that each map is not going to be perfect. Sometimes the geography of the state is going to be favorable to one party or the other, and in states with only 3 or 4 congressional districts, it can be much harder to reflect an overall partisan balance of the state. So there is some nuance to this, but we're going to just gloss over it, and this should give us a general idea of things. Now, the first thing we could do is look at the overall House numbers. And we can see that Republicans won 222 seats. So if we divide that by 435, the total number of seats, that comes out to about 51% of the seats that Republicans will be holding. If we look at that popular vote, here on Wikipedia, it shows that Republicans won 50.7% of the popular vote, so that's only about 0.3% off. So that is actually very close. Now for the Democrats, they have 213 seats, and that will come out to them holding about 49% of the seats, but they did get 47.8% of the popular vote. So again, these things aren't perfect, but on a glance, the Democrats will be holding 1% more seats than they got in the popular vote. But of course, there are third-party votes, other things like that to consider, but this does give us a general baseline. So let's jump into this, and again, we're not going to do the full top 10, we're going to do the top 5 from each, but the number 5 worst map I had for the Democrats was in Texas. I think the map favored Republicans clearly, but I also think Republicans could have snagged another seat out of this if they really wanted to get highly aggressive. They spent most of their efforts strengthening all the seats that might have been in jeopardy, mostly in the suburbs. They picked up 1 in South Texas, but there's another 2 that they did not pick up, but they did generally get closer than in previous elections. And if we take a look at the results, of the 38 congressional districts, Republicans will have 25 of them, and that will be 65.8% of the seats. And if we compare that to the popular vote, they did win 57.8. The Democrats will control 13 seats, or 34.2% of the seats, and they did win 39.7% of the popular vote. So to me, that does indicate a Republican bias, but it's definitely not overwhelming. I think, in all fairness, Republicans should control 1 less seat here, maybe 2. Democrats should probably have 1 to 2 more seats. But the popular vote compared to the number of seats held, Republicans are up by about 8%. The Democrats are down by about 5%. So that is certainly an imbalance. And generally, with more seats, it's easier to correct an imbalance. So Texas does have a lot of seats. And I think it's legitimate for the Democrats on a macro level for the entire state partisan reflection to want to have another 1 to 2 seats. That to me is fair. But as I've said many times, it's not going to work out exactly perfectly. And of course, Republicans did control the process for redistricting. They're going to have a little bit of an advantage. I do think it's an advantage. There's not many competitive seats in Texas, but I don't think it's the absolute wipeout I've seen some people say it is. Now let's go on to the number 5 worst map for the Republicans, and that I had as Maryland. The original map was absolutely atrocious for the Republicans. They did have to redraw it. They came up with this map. It still favors the Democrats, but it does give the Republicans a chance to pick up a 2nd district here on the Western Panhandle. So let's see how they did. Well, there's 8 congressional districts here in Maryland, and the Democrats won 7 of the 8. That is 87.5% of the seats they will control. But for the popular vote, they only won 64.7%. So that is already 23 points in favor of the Democrats. And of course, Republicans won 1 seat. That's 12.5% of the seats. But they won in the popular vote 34.6%. So that is a substantial gap. And in that district that they had a chance in, they still only got about 9 points within winning it. And again, everything doesn't have to be perfect, but having 1 seat out of 8, when you're winning over a third of the vote, that is unfair. Republicans should definitely have 1 more seat, and I think a 3rd seat should be semi-competitive. I understand it's a blue state, but I do think it's possible to have a 2nd Republican district in that panhandle. The geography is much better than the original map, but still, this is definitely a map that favors the Democrats. And the number 4 worst map for the Democrats is Arizona. There's 9 congressional districts here. They did have an independent commission. The previous map was a little tougher for Republicans. This map is tougher for the Democrats. Let's take a look at the results, and Republicans won 6 seats, or 66.7% of the total seats. They got 56.4% of the vote. That is a 10-point gap in favor of the Republicans. And Democrats on the other end won 3 seats, or 33.3%, and they got 42.8% of the popular vote. So that's close to another 10-point gap where the Democrats overperformed in the popular vote, but they got shortchanged on the number of seats. So probably in a perfect world, Democrats would have 4 seats here, Republicans would have 5. That would end up being about a 56-44 split, as opposed to the 67-33. There were some close races here, but Democrats are coming up a little bit short this time. The number 4 worst map for the Republicans is in Oregon. Oregon gained a 6th congressional seat this time. The Democrats did some dirty politics, and they prevented Republicans to really having an advantage in any of the other districts, aside from the deep red one they already have. The vote around Portland is clearly cracked to favor the Democrats. One district had an even partisan lean, the Kurt Schrader district. He lost in the primary, and Republicans did actually pick up that seat, and the results were Democrats will control 4 seats. Again, that's 2/3 of the seats, but they got 53.2% of the popular vote. Republicans will control 2 of those seats, that is 1/3, and they got 44.7% of the popular vote. So this is probably what the map should be almost every time. Republicans really had to scrape by to win that 2nd seat. If it was a 3-3 split, that would probably favor the Republicans just a little bit too much. Republicans should have 2, and the 4th district should only have a Democratic lean to it. On to the number 3 worst map for the Democrats, and that was in Tennessee. I don't think this map got enough attention, but Republicans did gerrymander it and crack the vote around Nashville so they can gain an additional seat, and that's exactly what happened. There are 9 districts in Tennessee. Republicans won 8 of them, or 88.8% of the seats. And here on Wikipedia, they actually do not have the popular vote for the entire state yet. 2 years ago, it was about a 59-39 split in favor of the Republicans. If we go by that, it's clear that the Democrats should have a 2nd seat in Tennessee. Maybe even a 3rd competitive district would be most fair. Again, I understand geography is a factor, but overall partisan fairness, this map definitely favors the Republicans by a lot. On to the number 3 worst map for the Republicans, and that is in New Jersey. This map I don't think got enough attention for being a really bad map, but I think it is. I think the geography is ugly on it, and there was supposed to be an independent commission, but in the end, the Democrats ended up getting a favorable map. There are 12 seats in New Jersey, and Republicans were able to flip 1 of them, but Democrats will control 9 of the 12 seats. That's an easy 75% of the seats, but they only got 54.1% of the popular vote. Republicans will control 3 or 25% of the seats, but they got 45.9% of the vote. So that is a substantial gap to get 54% of the vote and control 75% of the seats. And this is even after picking up a seat. There's no question Republicans should have another seat in New Jersey, and there should also be another seat on top of that that is competitive. I think of New Jersey as a fairly blue state, and it is. There is a lot of red vote in New Jersey. It's just that a lot of times on a statewide level, we don't get to see it reflected. But when you look at these House results, this is a big advantage for the Democrats. The number 2 worst map for the Democrats is in Ohio. This map could be redrawn with the new state Supreme Court. It definitely favored Republicans. However, Democrats had some nice gains, even considering this map. But I've said previously, there is a lot of blue vote in Ohio. It's just that the geography favors the Republicans. Democrats have a lot of medium-sized cities with blue vote, and that is just going to translate into less House seats. If we look at the results, there's 15 House seats in Ohio. Republicans will control 10 of them. Again, that is 2/3. But they won 56.6% of the popular vote. Democrats will control 1/3, and they got 43.6% of the popular vote. So even though Democrats did have some nice results here, at a statewide level, they should probably have another seat still. Some of this geography I think is questionable on this Ohio map, but it still does favor the Republicans. And I know if the Republicans do redraw this map, which I'm sure they're going to want to now because they underperformed, Republicans could end up picking up a couple more seats out of this. The number 2 worst map for the Republicans is in California. California lost a seat in this redistricting, and they're down to 52 seats. That's still by far the most seats. So with that many seats, I think it would be easier to match the partisan reflection of the state. Granted, it is a blue state, but there's definitely a lot of red vote out there. There was an independent commission, but I do think this map clearly favors the Democrats, and let's take a look at the results. So Democrats will control 40 seats out of 52. That is 76.9% of the seats. But on the popular vote, they won 63.7. so that is a pretty big gap. And Republicans will control 23.1% of the seats, but they won 35.8% of the popular vote. There were some close races, but even having said all that, if Republicans are winning more than a third of the vote and only controlling 23% of the seats, and this wasn't any kind of a blue wave, I think this map is very much in favor of the Democrats. It doesn't have to be a perfect 2/3 to 1/3 reflection, but it's hard to really make a case that Republicans should not have at least 2 more seats out of this, probably even 3 or 4. And let's go on to the worst map for the Democrats, and that is, of course, no surprise, going to be in Florida. The map is still challenged in court, so we'll see what happens with that. But Ron DeSantis pretty much got what he wanted, and this map absolutely does benefit the Republicans. The one positive thing I will say about this map is the geography is not too terrible. Some of the blue vote is cracked between St. Petersburg and Tampa. There's an ugly district here like in the 20th, but compared to some other maps I've seen, especially ones with a lot of districts like California, Texas, New York, this is not too terrible looking of a map. But let's take a look at the results. And now Florida does have 28 congressional districts. Republicans will control 20 of them. They picked up 4 seats here, and that is 71.4% of the total seats. And in the popular vote, even though they had a great night in Florida, that still comes out to 58.3% of the popular vote. So that's clearly in favor of the Republicans. And Democrats will control 8 of those seats, and that is about 28.6%. In the popular vote, they won 40.4%, so they're clearly getting shortchanged, even though the state is trending toward the right. And it was clearly a big red wave in Florida. Democrats should still have at least 1 more seat out of this. Even in an even year, this might actually end up being the same results, and that would look really bad then for the Democrats. Because in an even year, I think they should have 2 to 3 more seats. Some people will say 4, but I do think the state is trending to the right, and I don't think Democrats probably should be controlling 12 of the seats anymore at this point, unless it was really a blue wave. So this is the worst map for the Democrats. It's an unfair advantage for the Republicans. Let's move on to the absolute worst map for the Republicans. That is in Illinois. Illinois did lose a seat this cycle. They are down to 17 seats, but personally I think this map is worse than every map. First off, the geography is extremely ugly and gerrymandered just to pack the Republicans into 3 deep red districts and give Democrats a shot at the other 14. There's a chance Republicans maybe pick up one of these districts. It did not happen. I think this map is absolutely atrocious. I don't think it got enough attention in the media. It didn't go anywhere in the courts. So all those factors, I think, make this the absolute worst map. But let's take a look at the results. So Democrats will control 14 seats, and that's 82.4% of the seats. And they only won 55.7% of the popular vote. And Republicans, on the other hand, they're going to control 17.6% of the seats, but they won 44.1%. That is an absolutely mind-blowing gap. And it's not like there's only 4 or 5 districts here where there could be a huge gap like that. The geography is horrible. The courts did nothing. This is a rock-bottom tier map. Republicans should probably have at least 3 more seats here, in my opinion. I think this should have gotten more attention. I think it still should get more attention. That's why I'm bringing it up in this video. For all the attention on some of the other states, Illinois, I think, is under the radar. Democrats immorally seized control of this Illinois map. So those are a look at some of the maps. Some of these you might be familiar with. Some of them you might not be. Again, I have reviewed every map on this channel where I've gone into more depth about these districts. And of course, there's other maps. New Mexico is really bad for the Republicans, but there's only 3 districts. Oklahoma is really bad for the Democrats. There's 5 districts there. They're getting none. Of course, Massachusetts, 9 districts, and Republicans are never going to get any of those. That's atrocious. And in Iowa, Democrats are going to be shut out of those 4 districts. There's plenty of other things you could say about a lot of these states. And one last time, I do understand there is some nuance to be said for some of these states and some of these maps, given the geography, given the voting trends and the patterns. It's not going to be perfect, and I do urge you to take a second look at some of these maps. Some of them do not get as much attention as I think they should, and my view is always to base it on the partisan reflection of the state to the best you can. I'm not at all in favor of drawing districts based on race. I am in favor of drawing them based on the statewide partisan reflection, as long as there is no glaring geographic abnormalities. Of course, it's easier said than done. There's unique and niche kinds of scenarios. I get all that, but that is a topic for another video. Republicans might be redrawing maps in Ohio and North Carolina. We'll see how those go. Maybe other maps get struck down in Florida or New Mexico. But after this midterm, this is how the maps turned out. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of the states that I pointed out on here? Who do you think got a bigger advantage? Which states do you think were really bad but went under the radar? Let me know any of your thoughts on this down below. And if you enjoyed this channel, on your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.